This is the Free Spirits of L&D podcast, where we talk about life as a freelancer in the fascinating world of learning and development, and ask our guests all the questions you wanted to know but were maybe too afraid to ask. Yes, we even talk about how we get business and what we all charge. At the end of each episode, each guest gets to set a bonus question for the next one. So whether you're thinking about taking the leap, brand new to freelancing, or an experienced freelancer, you won't want to miss this. In this episode, our special guest is Harry Patience-Davies. Harry's a storytelling coach, trainer, and co-founder of 13 Times, a consulting business that helps people make their presentations 13 times more impactful by embracing the power of storytelling. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here.
Now, this is probably a question I ask most people, but it feels like I need to frame it in this way for you. What is your freelancing story?
Well, my freelancing story actually started with an in-house story. I've had a quite varied career jumping around digital industries. I've been agency side, client side, and in about 2015, I went into Accenture as a digital consultant. And I, had a lot of fun, project management, product management, all that stuff. But about 7 years ago now, I won a competition to go to America and speak on stage. It was an internal competition within the company. And it was like a mini TED Talk thing. And I got to go and speak on stage. And we were all flown out, the 10 finalists, a day early. And we had a day with a storytelling coach. And I did not know that this job existed, and immediately wanted it, and just thought, this is incredible. It was working with people to improve their speeches, to improve the content, to improve their confidence, their body language, everything. And I had such a good time. When I got back to the UK, I basically internally lobbied and got to become the storytelling coach for the UK and Ireland for Accenture for about 18 months. And then as we went into 2020, we were halfway through 2020, I should say, there was a round of voluntary redundancies. And I said to the business, because I was actually about to go on maternity leave, and I said to the business, when I come back from maternity leave, can I keep doing the storytelling stuff? I think I'm good at it. I think I'm adding value. I think this is amazing. And they said, no, you're going to go back and be a project manager again. And I was like, but guys, I'm a good project manager, but I'm an amazing storytelling coach. I want to do that. And so I put my hat in the ring for voluntary redundancy. And while I wouldn't exactly recommend to anybody to do this in exactly this order, I went on maternity leave on September 1st. I accepted voluntary redundancy on September 7th. I started a company on the 1st of October, and I had a baby on the 13th of October. So it was a very busy autumn, that one.
Oh, my goodness.
And ever since then, first under the title Patience-Davies Consulting, because if it's a consultancy, you can do anything. But earlier this year, we realized that we really needed a training brand that really resonated with people. And we launched 13 Times on the 1st of August, separated out the training part of the work from the consultancy part of the work a bit.
Yeah. Can we talk a bit more about that? Because I think a lot of people go through that process, and especially in the first few years of setting up their own consultancy. They might start a company with their own name. It's just kind of the simplest thing to do. People know them. You are the product. You're the face of the company. You might as well have your name on it. And then people kind of hive off these different brands and different fields. What was that process like for you?
So when we were originally coming up with the company name, I'm originally Patience and my husband is Davies. And then when we got married, we became Patience-Davies. In September 2019, he actually gave up his job because he wanted to see if he could run a food and wine business. That had been a dream for him for a number of years. And he had his first big event in February 2020. And I guess you can imagine what happened after that. There was not really any more big events. So he was doing some project management contract work, and we thought we'd all pull it under one banner. We went with our name because it seemed easy. You're exactly right. A lot of people do that. It seemed like the most obvious thing. But I think within about 2 years, it was kind of clear to us that because we called the company our name, it was really obvious to everybody on the outside that it was just us. And so we weren't getting any traction for the sort of bigger pieces of work that were available because the company was our name. It's like, oh, well, that's clearly you and no one else. It felt like we needed something that was a bit more ephemeral, a bit more funky and catches the attention. And I think that's what 13 Times does. there's an immediate question of why 13 times, and I can answer that a lot better than I can say why Patience Davies, which is, well, it's my name. Doesn't
Yeah.
work quite as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that you can even do that. I think it's like just from the kind of the purely practical basis of having a company and owning a company, and then saying we need a different brand for this kind of work, and we can have a different brand for this different kind of work here, and it can all sit under this kind of umbrella of this is our business. It can be really powerful. I know a guy who runs a HR consultancy nearby in Leeds, and they've recently done that. They've actually gone from just their name to having or like a premium brand, which has got its own kind of look and feel and a very distinct kind of image and persona, and then a more of a Yorkshire brand, which is all about kind of value, and it's a very leading around kind of about being the most competitive on price, and they're trying to target very, very different audiences with both of those brands, even though ultimately you're working with the same group of people. And it's a really interesting way of approaching things, and it's working really well for them so far.
You know, that's really resonating with me because one of the things that a lot of people have said to me is, what is your niche? Like, what is the target audience that you're looking at? What are the people you're aiming towards? And I've always said storytelling is for everybody. It could be for white lawyers and white collar workers. It can be for people who are interacting with members of the public. It can be for people who are doing customer service. It can be for everybody. I mean, maybe it might be a bit more challenging if it's somebody who's, you know, refurbishing a house or building a car. But at the same time, we're all human beings. We all talk. And I think a lot of people want to speak better. And I had real difficulty creating this niche because I was like, it's for everybody. It really works for everybody. But if you have the different brands, you can do that a lot better. That makes so much sense. Though I will admit, you said they had a Yorkshire-oriented brand, and my mind went immediately to Yorkshire tea. It just did.
It's either going to be that or a boy cycling up a hill carrying a loaf of bread.
Yes, that was also there, I will admit. Flat caps. Warburtons.
All right, so thinking about niching, because this is a really big part of setting out your stall, I think, when it comes to running your own freelance business.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that process of putting yourself in a box and giving yourself a really specific label about what it is you offer the world?
I will say that I don't actually feel great about it because I do think that the stuff that I offer, the training and coaching I offer, can be for anyone. But I will admit that in terms of public speaking coaching and presentation training, I am by no means the only person out there. There are quite a few people doing it, and everybody seems to have their own story of where they came from. So a lot of people who were actors end up doing this. And I've seen people who were journalists end up doing this. Now, I was a management consultant. I was only a management consultant for 4 years, but I was a management consultant. And so it felt very much like saying, you know what? I can teach people within consultancies, or I can teach people who are in agencies to do this, whereas maybe the BBC might want to hire somebody who's got an acting background or a journalism background. And so when we started out, I really targeted the consultancies, and it didn't work. Mostly because big consultancies have a lot of money. And so they're used to organizations that are span the entire globe and can have huge numbers of staff and can supply different languages. And we are still small. We have some very lovely associates, including one person I actually worked with at Accenture. We used to teach storytelling together at Accenture, and now we're teaching storytelling together under my brand, which I love. So I think that initially I got the niching wrong. I really do. And so now I've tried to retarget it a little bit. And often what we've found is the people that we're working with are quite technical, quite scientific, software engineers, architects, developers. And often these are incredibly talented and really smart people who just haven't always built up the soft skills of being able to explain what it is they do. And so if I'm targeting any niche right now, I'm targeting that as a type of person. But you find those type of people in all sorts of industries. So again, I probably need someone to come and do like a niching workshop with me so we can drill in a bit more and determine how we're going to put that together. I think that niching offers us the opportunity to work alongside people who are in the same area rather than against them. I mean, I've spoken to several other storytelling coaches. We've had uh, Zoom coffees and lots of DM chat and everything. And I don't feel intimidated or scared by them or, like I want to steal their clients. And I hope they feel the same about me. And it feels like if we've got this niching focus, someone can come to me and say, I need media training. And I can say, that's not me, but I know someone. And if someone went to that journalist and said, I need training to work with developers, hopefully she will say, that's not me, but I know Harry. So I think that niching is a really healthy way of everybody working together in an ecosystem, but it's also really, really hard to define. And I'm still learning, I will admit.
Yeah. It's making me think of a couple of things. First of all, a little plug for L&D Free Spirits Network. There is actually a whole series of resources around niching as part of that community and for members. If you're interested in getting into niching, there's some really good resources on there and are coming up soon as well. So do check those out on the website. I wonder if part of that is because we were talking in the green room beforehand about language and how language sort of shapes the meaning of how you look at something. And I think one of the challenges with even just the word freelancer is that it tends to be associated with a general sense of, this is someone who can do a bit of everything and can turn their hands to all sorts. And that can then make it really hard to contrast that with, actually, I'm really good at this specific thing and I'm going to tell the world how good I am at this specific thing, even though, if we're being honest, I'm probably good to turn my hand to all sorts of things. So there is a bit of there's a bit of dissonance there.
Well, yeah, I've always been what I called a digital generalist, right? I could write content for the web. I could edit video. I can create graphics. I've coded basic websites and HTML emails in my time. I've done some product management. I've done some project management. Very generalist skill set. And I will admit, I kind of find it hard to restrict myself to doing one thing. Because we've got the two brands, 13 Times for training and coaching and Patience Davies consulting consulting. I also get to do projects where I'm doing business analysis work and discovery work and digging into problems within a company. In fact, we just finished one, which was a load of fun, a nice 3-month chunk of work that we did. And I like the idea of kind of balancing the training and coaching side of what I do with like some short-term projects. Honestly, partially that's because I worry I'll get bored. But I think I've always been a bit of a generalist. I was a generalist in what I wanted to study. I did American studies, and I was a generalist. I was often, in the early part of my career, I was often the only person employed by a business to do websites or intranets or digital content. And so you had to be a generalist. You had to be able to use Photoshop, and you had to be able to use Premiere Pro or iMovie, and, also be able to write and also be able to find the errors in the HTML email. And so I've always had that sort of mindset, which has been quite creative, but also quite technical. I feel like freelancing really suits generalists because we can turn our hands to almost anything. So someone comes along to me and they say, I would like design thinking training. I can go, yes, I can teach that. I've taught it before. It's not on my website, but I can teach that. And someone comes along to me and they say, we've got a problem and we need to dig into it and find out why this system isn't working as it can do. And I'm like, well, I've got a lot of experience of business analysis. I can do that. And I think that's quite tricky. Because if freelancing suits generalists, getting work while being a freelancer is best applied via a niche. So how do we balance those two things? You need to be niche enough to get the work, but generalist enough to be able to respond to whatever's coming your way. I don't know about you, Mark, but I'm 4 years into this and I still have difficulty saying no to projects.
So in terms of saying no, what tends to happen for you when those opportunities come up?
I think there's only been 2 things in 4 years that I've given an outright no to. There was one piece of work which was about rebranding. And while I'm a good enough digital generalist to do some digital stuff, I'm not a brand expert. I never have been. But they read storytelling and they were like, oh, you can come tell our brand story. And I was like, I will work with you so that you can tell the brand story. I can't tell your brand story.
Yeah, I think everything you were just talking about there, sitting behind that generalist approach and also the difficulty saying no. A bit of a thread that I've noticed with a lot of freelancers we've had on the podcast so far is this really deep curiosity and excitement around learning. I find it as well. I think I was listening to you talk, thinking, yeah, I say yes to all sorts that I shouldn't say yes to, because I'm generally interested to have a go at it and see what happens and see what's around the corner. Like I don't know, as an example, a piece of work came up recently to do some work around psychological safety with the group. It's not my specialty, but they wanted a facilitator. I'm like, I've got the skills to do that bit, and I can learn the deeper kind of connections to psychological safety in the spaces between us contracting it and actually doing the work. And in either way, it doesn't really matter, because I'm just giving them some space to have the conversations and some frameworks and some discussion tools. And I'm genuinely interested to know what they think about it. And that curiosity can sometimes lead me down the wrong paths, because I really deeply want to have that experience and have that learning, rather than thinking more about it as, what does my business need me to say yes to and no to?
Yeah, I think it's quite hard to take that step back and say, is this the right piece of work for me and the business? Especially if you're looking at your, planned future income and where the money is coming from for the next 3 to 6 months. And you're like, there's a gap there. I need another project. And it's, this is another project. I will admit that I've never felt financial pressure like I have running my own business, because it's all on me.
Yeah.
Right, it's all on me and my husband, I should say. And actually right now he's bringing in more money to the business, which is great. And it's the constant freelance independent thing. Sometimes I've got a lot of work and he's got a little bit. Sometimes he's got a little and I've got a lot. Sometimes we've both got a lot. And occasionally, sometimes we've both got a little. And I will admit that I think there's a mindset about making peace with that I haven't quite got yet. He's made peace with it. He's a lot more chill about it. I am still, how are we paying the mortgage in February kind of feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of people have spoken about that. I think this is a really common concern and a feeling that people who are relatively early into freelancing find. And I suspect people who are very experienced, sort of 10-year plus freelancers, there is sometimes a bit of an illusion within employed work where a lot of people who are on contracts might have a 2-week notice period or a 2-month notice period. And actually, is that any different from having 3 months of revenue in the bank that you can pay the mortgage with? I don't know.
I think that's it. I think you're right. Paid work, employment is an illusion of stability. I think in the same way as being freelance is an illusion of flexibility, because one of the things I love about running my own business is that I get to drop my kids off at school pretty much every morning, and I get to have dinner with my family almost every night, in a way that when I was employed by somebody else, I couldn't, because I was often working remote, like in far-flung places like Crawley and Edgware. And from where I am in East London, it took a couple of hours to get there. And so I would often leave the house at 7 a.m. and not get back until 7 p.m. And I missed quite a lot of my son's life between the ages of 1 and 2. Because I was doing those hours, and that was just to do a standard 9 to 5. So if I wanted to push or had to stay late, I just didn't see my kid. When I'm freelance, I see him more, but I've still got work. You've still got deadlines. It's a lot easier, I think, to be able to say, no, I will not do work between 3:30 and 4:30 because I'm picking the kids up. But then I'll be back online at 7 p.m. tonight. So we could have a chat at 7 p.m. And it's not as flexible as it could be, in the same way as employed work is not as safe as it could be.
Wow. Yeah, that's such an important point. Can we move to talk about stories? Because I'm thinking about our audience for this group, and so many people who maybe are thinking about starting their freelancing journey, or maybe very first few steps into freelancing, or maybe established freelance businesses. What do you think makes a good story when it comes to talking about your business?
It's good to have a solid origin story. It's good to be able to understand the why you want to do this. And that why could absolutely be you want more flexibility, or you want more money, or you want to work a 4-day week. That's a perfectly legitimate why, but that's not the why you want to tell your potential clients. You want to have a why that you can lean upon, which is it's important that you want to do this sort of work, either working with sustainable industries or green sectors or B corporations. You need to be able to have a why that you can explain to somebody in really simple language. So why did I want to do this? Well, once I realized that public speaking skills was something that you could teach, I found myself really wanting to give that back and be able to support people who had difficulty telling their story. That's a pretty good why.
Mm.
And so, what is the client facing why for your business? And it's not, I mean, don't make it too cheesy or pandering. Why? Because I've always wanted to work with you. Creepy.
Yeah,
Won't get you work.
creepy.
Super creepy. So you need to understand the why. Storytelling is all about whys. I mean, there's a book called Start With Why by Simon Sinek, and it's great. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And that is all about finding the reason why this has happened, why you want to do it. Not just why you want to do this now, but why do you want to do it in 5 years' time? There's an exercise I do sometimes. It kind of brought me into this career. My husband and I used to play a game called In 5 Years' Time, like the Noah and the Whale song. In 5 years' time, we could be walking around a zoo. And so we would be literally walking around, generally around Victoria Park in East London. And we'd be saying, in 5 years' time, you're doing your PhD and I'm working with puppies. And so we used to come up with ridiculous ones, really fun ones. But after a while, it became, in 5 years' time, we're running our own business. We have 2 kids. We have the flexibility to pick the kids up from school. We take a month off every year and go on holiday with the kids. And I'm not there yet. But having that sense of goal, of the sort of life that you want to have, being able to visualize that, helps you tell the story of that, helps you understand what your why is.
Yeah. And I think that's a really crucial element of a why, is that it doesn't have to ever get there yet. It can always be aspirational. It can always be something that you're moving towards. And that's okay, because it helps you make decisions about what you are moving towards. Thinking about what we were talking about earlier on with niching, actually, if you've got a really compelling, really kind of high impact why statement or story, it helps you kind of go back to that and just sound out some stuff and go, actually, does this help serve that for my business? If I've got an opportunity that sounds interesting or exciting, will it help me move a bit further towards my why? If not, maybe we want to put that on the back burner for a little bit, or maybe even just say no.
Absolutely. Having that vision of where you want to be, it could be who you want to be or where you want to be, that helps you define who you want to work with.
You must see this all the time. I don't like to focus too much on the negative, but what are some of the typical pitfalls and mistakes people fall into when they're telling stories about themselves or their business?
Okay, so there's 2 big issues that I see all the time. Issue number 1 is they put way too much detail and time into the beginning of a story, right? We all know the structure: beginning, middle, and end. And when someone is establishing the beginning, they have to really, they feel like they have to give you all of this information so that you'll understand where they were and what they did. But the absolute truth of it is, people tend to spend a lot of time doing the beginning and a tiny bit on the middle and a tiny bit on the end. And the middle and the end are generally the more interesting parts. So if people spend too much time putting all of their detail into the beginning, you start to lose the audience. People are like, yeah, okay, get on with it. Skip to the end. Come on. So you need to be able to establish the beginning of your story quickly. What is the information that they need to know to make sense, to get to the middle and the end, which is where the meat and the chunk of it is. And that can be quite difficult. So I actually advocate not thinking about beginning, middle, and end, but thinking about context, complication, consequence. So context is establishing where and when this story is taking place. And so if it's a personal story, it's where physically are you and when are you on your personal timeline? Are you a child? Was this last week? Are you on holiday? Once we've established where and when, it's just, is there any other information that the audience needs to make this story make sense? Yes or no, there may or may not be. But then we get to the complication, which is often, well, the thing that's gone wrong, or the thing that's made life more difficult, or the path that went awry. And then the consequences, what did you do to overcome that? And so it's a really simple beginning, middle, end. But when we take it into context, complication, consequence, it kind of encourages people to get to the complication a lot faster.
Mm.
The other thing that I often find that people do is that they get a bit lost, right? They may be, this could be that they've been telling the story so many times and a detail just pings differently in their brain. And rather than going forward with the story, they just veer off over here. And someone's like, hold on, what do alpacas have to do with you getting lost in the forest? Oh, they don't. Let me come back and tell you about me being lost in the forest. But I've already lost the audience at that point. And the other thing they get lost is sometimes if they're not thinking about establishing all of that context right at the beginning, they get 3/4 of the way through the story and then they say something like, oh, by the way, this was in Greece. And it's like, yeah. So you really want to be able to use that little bit of structure, give people the information they need at the beginning so you can get to the middle and the end in a more kind of interesting factor. Because the absolute truth of it is, if you're telling a story, you don't have very long to do it. You know, if you're a stand-up comedian, sure, you've got as long as you're set. If you're doing a TED Talk, you've got 18 minutes. But if you spend 18 minutes on one story, it's not going to be a compelling TED Talk. Realistically, you have somewhere between 60 to 90 seconds. Maybe 2 minutes if it's a really good story. But that means you have to get to the meat of things quickly.
Yeah, I love that. So context, complication, and consequence.
Absolutely.
It's a really good framework for people to think about next time you're telling a story about yourself or your business or anything, I would have thought.
I find that it doesn't always work with happy stories. Like if the complication is, and then I fell in love, it's like, okay, we need a bit more detail. It can't just be, I was 17, I was in Greece, I met a person, and then I fell in love. That's going to require a bit more stuff. But most stories that we tell are about something going wrong.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I think we often lose that, don't we? We're so wired for story, and we are taught from an early age that there is a happy ever after ending to a lot of stories, whereas actually the ones that we are most compelled by and the ones that we can connect and engage with most often are stories of failure. Because everyone's failed at something. Everyone's had a disappointment. Everyone's had a loss of some description. And actually being able to connect on that kind of level can be really compelling. I remember I as an experiment, I was working with a group earlier this year. We were doing some stuff around resilience. And I just felt that it was a little bit dry. I knew intuitively that it needed something to kind of bring everything together. And so I ended up starting with telling the story about my son having experienced his first death, and I felt the energy in the room shift as we were doing that, and we turned it into this idea of being playful with change. That was kind of the connection. But it was interesting how what you were saying about the context there was really key. Actually, people didn't care about the agenda or what we were going to be going through. Actually, the complication in that particular setting threw people off guard a bit, and also helped connect and put themselves into the story. And I had lots of feedback afterwards about people saying, "Oh my gosh, you know, how is he? How is he getting on?" And people cared about what the outcome was, even though that wasn't really the point of why we were exploring change. But it helped weave it all together with some sort of, well, it's an emotion, isn't it? It's an emotional connection.
I love that you said weave it all together, because one of the things that I often think, human beings are social animals. And I often think that storytelling is the thread that kind of goes between people. We find similar experiences that we've gone through, or similar aspirations, or similar challenges. I mean, how many times have you sat down, maybe you're waiting for a train or in an airport or in a doctor's waiting room or something, just something where people have to wait, and you maybe have a chat with a complete stranger, and they might tell you, or you might tell them, a story about a bad day or a bad journey, and then they'll tell you a story about a bad day or a bad journey, and then you'll sit there swapping stories. It's so much of our communication is swapping stories.
Yeah.
And it's how we build these meaningful relationships. It's how we register whether or not we like someone, how they react in that circumstance versus how we would react. And I like the idea of storytelling as social glue, or kind of the knitting that holds us all together.
Love that. Thank you, Harry. I wanted to move on to our question from our previous guest, which was Kirsty Lewis from the School of Facilitation. She posed a question for you, not knowing it would be you. And her question was, what one piece of advice would you give to somebody starting their own business?
I will actually give a piece of advice that was given to me right at the beginning when we were doing it, which is that for the first 3 years of your business, almost all of your business is going to come through your network. So you need to spend a lot of time looking at your network and maintaining your network and taking people for coffee and reaching out to them and making sure that people see you as an available resource that they can take advantage of. Now, at the same time, that advice was given to me by a business coach who also told me not to spend any time marketing or advertising myself. And I think he was wrong on that, because I'm in year 4 and we're having to spend a lot of time marketing ourselves because we didn't do it before because we were leaning on our network. So I think it's a sliding scale. You know, in the first year, network. In the second year, maybe something like 75% network, 25% marketing. And you want to kind of get to a point where you're constantly working with your network and expanding your network and people are recommending you, but you're also via marketing constantly meeting new people and being able to reach into new industries and talk out there. And I think there's a fine balance to achieve. And I suppose the other piece of advice that I really wish I'd been given way back in the day was never have more than 25% of your business with one client. Because that business can go. They could have a change of management. They could have a change of budgets. It could be completely out of your control, and suddenly a huge chunk of your income disappears. It happened to us about 15 months ago, and it was what drove me to start doing some marketing, because suddenly 40% of our income gone. Not my fault. Nothing I can do about it. But that's a big financial hit. Yeah. So spread it out.
I was just drawn to the word available that you used earlier on, and I haven't figured this out yet, so I'm really interested in your take on it. Is how do you communicate that you are available to people without going and telling people that you need their work? I was thinking about, in another life, I used to run a consulting business where we used to work with a lot of associates, and my kind of finger in the air sense of, oh, should we just bring this person in, was based on the last coffee that we'd had and whether they told me they were really busy or not. If they were told me they were really busy, I would often assume, probably wrong, incorrectly, without asking, that they were too busy to take on the piece of work and I probably shouldn't ask them. Whereas if they'd said something like, actually, it's been really quiet last few months, they would typically go to the top of my list. And I was thinking, A, they need the work, but also they're going to be available. I'll go and ask them. How do you get that message right?
I think it's really challenging. I consider LinkedIn to be my shop window as much as possible. I have a website, but it's there to reinforce that I exist. It's not there to drive traffic via SEO or anything. LinkedIn is the shop window for me. It's this very delicate balance. If I post a lot about I'm teaching this class, I'm traveling for this, people are like, oh, you're so busy, it's incredible. And if I don't post a lot about that and I instead focus on how-tos and thought leadership, then people are like, oh, wow, do you not have a lot on? And it's so hard. I haven't found the balance, I will admit. I definitely think one thing that struck me from what you just said, that based on the last coffee I had with this person, you'd make a call. And I think that we can't always be in a position where we're going and having a virtual chat, but a physical chat in the same location with somebody, but we can have virtual chats and we can be reaching out to our network and seeing how's it going? Happy birthday. How's that project gone? Did it go live? And it feels a bit disingenuous sometimes, because it feels like we're reaching out to colleagues who have been friends and kind of saying, hey, how's it going? Remember that I exist. Yeah. But the absolute truth of it is there are pieces of work I've gotten this year purely because somebody reached out to me and said, I've seen you talking about this on LinkedIn. and I think that's something we could do with, has happened twice this year from people who were former colleagues, absolutely lovely people, but did not know me in this context of storytelling at all. They knew me in a earlier point in my career when I was doing different things. And because I was talking about it, they were like, oh, yeah, I mean, that's Harry. I know her. She seems to know what she's talking about. We'll get her in. And so I definitely think there's a level of self-promotion you have to do to keep yourself fresh in people's minds, and a level of one-to-one reaching out, messaging, whether that's via WhatsApp or LinkedIn, LinkedIn messages or whatever, to just kind of maintain your network and maintain people's awareness of you.
Yeah, there's a psychological bias called recency bias. Well, there's primacy bias and there's recency bias, which is basically if you give people a list of things to remember, they'll almost always only ever remember the first things and the last things that they've seen.
Yeah.
And it absolutely goes for LinkedIn, I think, where you have to play that game. It is a game where if you haven't appeared on someone's feed for a little while, you can't really blame them if they haven't thought of you for that piece of work, because it's nothing personal. It's not that they don't respect you or they don't recognize all the things that you can offer. It's just that they haven't seen you for a while, and probably a bit like me, they just assume that you're either busy doing something else or you haven't engaged with that platform for a little while. It's so interesting, isn't it? That's become a really big part of how we tend to kind of rank people.
It's interesting. I would love to know more about the LinkedIn algorithm. Obviously, lots of people say that they understand it, and everybody's got different opinions of this. But I was talking to somebody the other day, and she said to me, oh, yes, I see you on LinkedIn. You're always talking about your bike and Lego. And I thought, I've put up one post about a bike in a year. So why did that one resonate? And yeah, there's a fair few about Lego, but probably about 20% of what I do is Lego, and a good 75% of what I do is storytelling. So why am I resonating in her head for cycling and Lego as opposed to 75% of my content that I push out there? And you're like, well, that's interesting. Why is that connection there?
Wow. Yeah.
I wonder how smart the algorithm is. Like, if it knows that person A has liked posts about cycling before, will it show them more cycling posts? Or what, I guess. I wonder how smart the algorithm is.
I suspect that will be the case. Certainly that's how the game works with YouTube. It will always try, their game, the platform's game, is to keep you there as long as possible. And if they know that you've liked a post about cycling and Lego, they will feed you as much of that content as possible to keep you in that system and keep you clicking and reading and browsing.
I do kind of wonder as well, because I've definitely seen upticks in analytics, eyeballs on my content on LinkedIn after I've had some direct messages with people. I definitely feel like after you've had a couple of direct messages, your content just gets pushed more into their feed, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to keep having those direct message conversations and reach out to people and have a chat and liking and commenting on other people's stuff. It has to be more open. But it's been really interesting to me, some of the tools that you get for LinkedIn. Have you seen these? Like there's a great one called Dripify, which you can set up journeys in to say, I want people who are working in this industry, in this place with this job title, who are second level connections. So you establish a list and then you say, I want you to send a connection request to them with this note. And if they don't answer in a couple of days, you can have it so it likes one of their posts. And then if they don't answer a couple more days after that, it can endorse them for a skill. And then if they still don't care about you, it goes off. But if they do answer and they say, yes, I'll connect with you, you can then have an automatic message set up of thanks for connecting, and then another automatic message a few days later of, by the way, I have a webinar coming up. Would you like to come along? And another message a few days later. And I only came across this about a week ago, and I'm finding it fascinating. I'm having a play with it at the moment. And it's basically doing for my LinkedIn what I used to sit on the sofa in the evening after the kids were in bed, manually going through LinkedIn, looking for interesting people and sending them connection requests. And now this tool is doing it for me. And suddenly I don't have to do that at 9 o'clock at night on the sofa with my laptop, which I'm happy about because I've gotten some time back. And there's so many add-ons and tools. I didn't even know any of them existed. Like, Authored Up. Have you seen Authored Up for LinkedIn? No. Authored Up is a content posting tool, and it basically gives you all of the analytics of everything you've done before. So it gives you content suggestions for what you should reuse, but it also does a readability view on anything you write, and it puts it through a readability to kind of say, this text is too complex. You need to simplify it down. It's again, another fascinating tool that I'm playing with on a free trial at the moment. And I feel like I need to do some proper research into this, because I'm kind of randomly coming across these tools and I'm like, oh, hold on, that's making things better. Why did I not know about this for the past 5 years? And maintaining your network and maintaining your audience is a lot of work, especially if you've got work as well. You know, you might be doing 9 to 5 on a piece of work for somebody, or you might be doing all day training courses for someone, having the prep and having the travel, and you've still got to spend a couple of hours a day on social media, connecting with people and reaching out and posting, and it's a lot.
It's so much. I find this a lot when I'm shooting videos, where I'll be on a shoot doing a piece of work, and then there'll be like a second shoot going on in the background, which is me curating it for my own social network, so that I can prove that I was there and it happened and that was me doing it. It can be really overwhelming sometimes. This proof that you are in the world, being of value to people, rather than just turning up and doing the stuff.
Maybe that's the piece of advice in the end, which is, I think when I started out, I thought I can just train people in storytelling and public speaking and presentation skills, and that's going to be my job. And maybe I'll do occasional bits of business analysis and it'll be fun. But that's not really your job. Your job is selling yourself in to people who want to hire you so that you can do that. And that takes up a lot more time than I ever thought it would.
Mm. Would you like to leave a question for our next guest, Harry?
I would. If you could have one skill, like one instant superpower, click your fingers and you've got it, what would it be?
Cool. All right. Love that. Do you want to have a little stab at that for yourself?
Oh, I know this one for me.
Okay.
I mean, some people are like, I want to be flying, I want to be super strong. No, I wish that I could speak every single language. I wish that I could meet somebody and just be immediately able to speak to them in their language and hear their stories and just connect with people all over the world. I basically have one language. I have English, and I've been working on French since I was a kid. Some gaps in the middle there since school, but I've got a 1,300-day Duolingo streak that I'm not letting go of for my French.
Impressive.
And even with that, you know, I'm apparently I can say lots of things, the little green owl. Once I'm actually in France, I'm like, un café, s'il vous plaît, and kind of hide. But yeah, I wish I was just good at languages. I wish I could speak all the languages.
Lovely. Thank you for that. And I'll definitely ask that of our next guest. We're going to move on to the question that we ask everybody. Mm-hmm. And we leave it to the last because it's usually the one that people most want to know the answer to. And that is, what is your day rate?
I hate to say it, but it depends.
Oh, ring the bell. Ring the bell. It depends, bell. Go on. Of course it depends. But
it depends.
Tell me more.
When I started out, I charged all of my courses on a per attendee basis. So I've got a 6-module course that I teach over 2 days, and generally I charge about £600 per person for that. So as a day rate, if you've got 10 people on the class, that's a £3,000 day rate. But that's not a day rate. That is a per attendee, and it gets a little bit tricksy about how that comes in. When I'm doing consultancy, my day rate tends to be between £750 to £1,000 a day, depending on the nature of the work and the nature of the deadlines. If it's something which is happening over a longer period of time, it tends to be a little lower. If it's something which is very intense and everything is happening in 1 month, it tends to be a little bit higher because I have to shunt other work out of the way. Mm. When I'm teaching, again, it depends a little bit on what the topic is. If I'm teaching something that's one of my standard courses and I've taught many times before, it would be about £1,200 a day plus VAT. But if I'm having to create new material, well, that gets higher. For example, I've got a design thinking course, which I've got, but I'm going to have to go and do a big spruce up for a client that wants it in February. I need to create a new workbook. I want to get a little deck of cards so that they've all got the resources to use afterwards. That is going to be about £2,000 a day because of the preparation time. It's a 2-day course, so that'll come up at about £4,000 plus expenses plus VAT. But it's going to take me at least 5 or 6 days of prep to get that done. Of course, then I'll have it for the future courses, at which point the price might go down. Maybe. I'm actually really bad at raising my prices. Maybe 2025 is the year that I should get better at that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would really resonate with that. It's really difficult to kind of justify a price list, well, especially when it's you. If it's like a product, you can kind of go, oh, this is the new price for the product. But if it's about them buying you and your time, and I guess this is probably back to the whole challenge with the day rates and kind of hourly rates, that it often becomes a race to the bottom because people want to try and compare those against other people, whereas actually it's really difficult to compare.
And I've done a lot of work with lawyers recently. I've done a lot of work with law firms, and they don't want a day rate. They want an hourly rate. And then that gets a bit more complicated because lawyers often bill in 6-minute increments. So you kind of want an hourly rate, which is divisible by 10 into 6-minute increments that really make sense so that they can figure it all out. And it's been tricky. I've got some companies, I've got associates for my material, but I also work as an associate for some companies myself to pick up odd pieces of work. And that's often about £85 an hour as an associate rate. But that's often because they want 2 hours here and 2 hours there and not a full day. And so again, it gets a bit tricky. An hourly into daily.
Yeah. And we haven't really talked about this concept so far on the podcast, but the idea of value, it looks like it should be an absolute thing. So you either have a cheap hourly rate, a medium hourly rate, or an expensive hourly rate, but it's not. It's completely relative, and it's depending on so many different things. I remember a long time ago, in another life, I used to work as a kind of semi-professional musician. So I used to do like session work. I used to go off and do gigs, and it was almost always paid hourly. And people used to kind of come back and they would challenge that, and they'd be like, "Oh, is that sounds like quite a lot?" And I'd have to come and justify it and go, "Well, no, because you might be paying me X £100 for a 3-hour set or a 2-hour set, but behind that, I've got to pay my insurance, I've got to pay my travel to get there, I've got to keep all of my equipment up to date, I've got to maybe learn some songs, which might take me all week, I've got to rehearse them," and no one ever sees that. They just see the rate that they're giving you for what seems like 2 hours of work, which seems to them relatively expensive. And getting into that conversation where you're having to justify what value you're adding is really complex and really hard, I think.
And it's really hard to put a number on it. I mean, I've just finished a piece of work where we have a number on some of the value. I think there was a lot of value created, but there was one particular thing where there was an amount of money that was being refunded that actually shouldn't be refunded. And so it was immediately able to say, now that we've identified that shouldn't be refunded, here's some immediate value that you've got. But then there's all of this other stuff that is completely ephemeral. And we were like, okay, we're assuming that 20% of people have this issue and 1% of the 20% find it so annoying that they stop working with you. So we're going to take your total revenue and divide it by 20% and divide it by 1% and then divide it by, and it's completely made up. We have no way of knowing some of these types of value. Sometimes value numbers can be proved and sometimes value numbers are completely made up. And it's often down to whether or not the client wants to hear you about it. And you can say, hey, I think we've just saved you $100,000. And they can go, yeah. Or you can say, hey, we've just saved you $100,000. And they can say, oh, actually, I think it's more than that. So there's also like the attitude that people take that comes in. I'm working with a business coach and she's been encouraging me to raise my prices. But she also said that when she's doing work with people, she puts a line in the contract that says if there's provable business value that is generated as a result of her work, she gets 10%. And, I was like, how do I add that line to my contracts? How do you have that conversation with somebody to get that in place? And I think it's wonderful if you can.
Wow.
I don't know how you do.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about like how that would work in any other industry. Like walking into a restaurant and say, you can pay a percentage of how full you feel when you leave.
Well, you do have restaurants that do pay what you like, don't you?
Yeah.
You sometimes have restaurants where you go along and, okay, you have an amazing dinner and then you pay what you like. And I always wonder about that because surely in walking into the restaurant, I know how much money I have. It's really hard to put a number on what we do. I mean, especially because what I do is often helping people build their confidence. And you can help someone build their confidence and they could get a new job, or they could get promotion, or they could get a stronger reputation. And how much of that is down to their confidence now, or as opposed to everything else that's going on? I will admit that pricing is probably one of my biggest challenges when things come in. And I have a terrible habit of undercutting myself.
Yeah.
I remember in a completely personal life anecdote, my husband and I, we were walking past a shop and they were having a sale, and there was this coffee table. And it looked really cool. And we're like, oh, well, how much is the coffee table? And the shop owner said, it's £750, but make me an offer. And I was just there and I was like, what do I start with? What do I do? Should I start with 100? No, 100's like really small. Maybe I should start with 200. No, that's not enough. That's not enough. Okay, so half of 750 is 375. Okay, so I could go for 375. Literally, this is all happening, playing out in my head. And I said, £500. And he went, sold. And I was like, shit.
Yeah.
I should definitely have started lower.
And thinking back to the whole value being relative there, very, very clever move by their point, because they could have just said, make me an offer.
Yes.
But because they framed it with, it's £750, you've automatically got a value in your head that you're kind of nudging yourself towards. Because you could have gone in with £100, and chances are you wouldn't have offended them.
Why didn't I go in with £100? Why did I automatically, in that case, overcut myself, but basically undercut? And I was like, why did I do that? That was so stupid.
And likewise for them, if they just said, make me an offer, you could have gone £900 because you thought that was what it was worth, and they'd have been over what they thought it was worth.
Sold, absolutely.
What a fascinating way of approaching things. Make me an offer.
My husband said to me afterwards, why didn't you do less? Clearly, it's old stock that they're trying to get out of the shop to put something else in. And I was just like, I'm sorry. I thought about it too much. And the price just kept going up inside my head.
I do know people who take a similar approach to pricing their services as freelancers. Not exactly the same, but in our context, thinking about what we've just been talking about, and putting your prices up, the equivalent would be saying, oh, here's a piece of work. What's your price? And you come back and say, actually, it's normally £2,000 a day. What would it be worth to you in terms of the value that I'm going to add, and in terms of the things that I can guarantee we will walk away with? And chances are it's going to be north of 1,000, their answer to that, because you've already framed it with with what the value is to start off with. You haven't discounted yourself from the off. You haven't gone back and said, oh, actually it's normally £2,000, but I can give you a 10% discount if you confirm by the end of the week, that kind of thing, because you're taking money off your table by doing that. But by giving it to them and saying, what's it worth to you? What's that investment worth to you? Or how much are you prepared to invest in this? It would be a slightly different framing. Then you might get a different response.
This was one of the reasons why I really like doing the cost as per participant. Because if it's 15 people on a 2-day course, is it worth £200 per person for them to have a really good course? Or is it worth £499 per person or £600 per person? And suddenly these figures get very healthy. But because you framed it as per person, they can say, oh, well, I actually only want 8 people to do the course, not 15, so it'll be this much. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Minimum of 6. I always have to have minimum of 6. Otherwise, the exercises don't work. I haven't liked the shift from per attendee cost to day rate cost. I feel like I'm constantly underpricing myself, because obviously every time we are having a conversation with a new client and they want a day rate cost, it's like, okay, well, there's day rate cost for teaching, but I probably should add some like preparation cost into that. And how do we do this and all the rest of it? And I'm not a great negotiator.
Well, if we have any people listening in who are really good at this, I certainly can't help with that, because I'm just as bad with negotiating against myself in a lot of situations. If anyone's listening in who's got any tips for us, please let us know. You might even want to become our next podcast guest. And likewise, you want to get in touch with Harry and I and give us some tips about what we can do. To that end, if people do want to find out more about you and what you do, Harry, how can people find you?
My website is www.13-times.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn, But admittedly, in that case, I am Harriet Patience Davies. But if you search Harriet and storytelling, you're probably going to find me pretty quickly.
Or if you search for Lego and bicycles.
Apparently, Lego and bicycles.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's been wonderful having you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
If you enjoyed this episode, let us know by leaving a review on your favourite podcast app. It really makes a difference. And if you want to learn more about how L&D Free Spirits can lift up your freelancing business, you can find out more information at ldfreespirits.com.